Welcome to the Career Conversations Podcast. This is a YSU podcast about career choices and the unexpected changes that we make along the way. My name is Dr. Justin Edwards with the Office of Career Exploration and Development, and today we're here for a panel of alumni from the Cliff College of Creative Arts. Joining me today is Emily Fetzko. Am I pronouncing that right, Emily?
Yes.
I am, yes. A 2021 graduate. I'm going to let you tell more of your story and what your major was in a few seconds. I'm also joined by Elijah DuPonte, a 2020 graduate. So what I'd like to do to start our conversation today is just ask each of you to share your major, some of the process of how you've used that major as you start your career, and then we'll kind of dive into some deeper conversations as we move along. So, Emily, do you want to start us off?
Sure.
Awesome.
So I studied interdisciplinary studio art, and the work that I was focusing on while I was in school was mainly painting and sculpture, and I did some printmaking in between, and that's what my senior show consisted of. Prior to my studio major, I was an art education major and decided to switch strictly to studio art, which was honestly the best decision I could have made at the time, and my art education upbringing has had a lot of influence on how I handle making art today.
I'm excited to get deeper into that and talk more about the education background and how you made that choice to really focus on the studio art pathway. So thanks for sharing. Elijah, tell us about your background.
So I started here as a undecided health and human services major, and then I was also a photography minor, and then I decided to switch to a photography major when I was starting school here officially. I started as a college credit plus student and did 2 years here in high school, fully on campus, and now I currently work as a contracted assistant to the collections registrar at the Butler Institute of American Art. I work as a freelance photographer, and then I also have a full-time day job as the administrative coordinator to community building strategies, and we do all operations for 4 nonprofits.
Awesome. So you have a lot of pieces we can dive into, even starting as an undecided HHS major, and I want to talk about that thought process coming in with some credits from CCP. For those people who are listening to this, CCP stands for College Credit Plus, so it's like college and high school classes. So we'll talk more about that. One of the first things I want to dive into is not hyper career related. I want to talk a little bit about the campus. I want to talk about YSU and kind of how things have changed. What I'd like both of you to reflect on for the folks listening is how did you see campus change while you were a student? You're both recent grads, 2020, 2021. Talk about how campus changed over the time that you were here, and where are some of your favorite places on campus?
Physically, YSU has changed a lot. Definitely become a lot more beautiful. It's feeling a lot more like a campus and connected. It's like kind of awesome to like drive down the street and see like that big Y on the sidewalk. It's awesome to have crosswalks now so we don't get hit by cars walking to class. We have Chipotle, which I remember the announcement. It was amazing.
Yes, Chipotle.
It's just been awesome. I remember coming here to during English Festival when I was in 8th grade and thinking, YSU, why would I want to go there? It's not pretty, it's kind of just there. But since college, it's definitely become a lot more beautiful. It feels like a home, connected, just a lot of community. Despite the pandemic, before that, it was still getting better. Yes, we all hated the long construction work that was happening. You couldn't drive down Wick for months, maybe a year, but it was all worth it. We have better access to parking now.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
So Elijah, you're I think referring to the long project to bury the electrical wires on Wick Avenue. And it's great that you brought that up because it gave me an excuse to talk about how I feel like that was one of the most impactful things we've done on campus, right? Like burying those electrical wires and having Wick Avenue look more like a college town, I think actually made a big difference, right? When you drive down Wick Avenue, you feel like you're on a college campus. Those light fixtures make it more aesthetically pleasing to not have the electrical wires hanging there. And I've always sort of been fond of how that looks over there, even if we did have to jump over some ditches while they were working on that project. Well, I'd like to come back to you, Emily, because you mentioned that when you started, you were art education.
Yes.
So tell me more, I guess, if you can put yourself in the shoes of yourself when you first came to YSU, what initially attracted you to art education, and then how did that evolve to eventually receive your Bachelor of Fine Arts in Interdisciplinary Studio Arts?
Sure. I've been drawing since I could hold a pencil. My dad had a really big influence on me being able to express myself with writing utensils or crayons and markers, at the time, and he would sit down and draw things with me. And I've always been drawn to helping people and helping somebody learn something or overcome something. And I always had good relations with people who were younger than me. I'm also the oldest out of my two siblings, and in a way I had to parent them, and it was natural to do that. But my love for art and knowing that I can teach somebody something successfully, I figured it would have been a good thing to go into. And I will say that I felt very driven about it until the pandemic happened, and I saw the way that teachers were being treated, and I became more knowledgeable about one-on-one interaction with people and how our experiences affect how we interact with one another. And I was going through a lot of personal things at the time, and that made me decide that being in a classroom full of people who look up to me wasn't the best idea, because as a teacher, if I'm not getting my needs met, how am I supposed to meet the needs of children who are hungry for education? They're hungry for information, and if I'm being limited to that, even art teachers, we're not getting budgets to buy enough materials to actually teach our students things, and I'm not in charge of changing that system. It's people above me, and I feel like maybe down the road I could be an art teacher in a public school system, but these personal changes made me want to create more as an artist. And I had very special people who were mentoring me at the time, and such as Lauren Baker. She's one of the sculpture professors here at YSU, and she had a really big influence on me developing the work that I did because it was very emotionally driven, and she helped pick that apart and made connections that I didn't see, and it was really just this big learning experience, and I wouldn't be where I am today without that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the recent research articles that came out from the Chronicle of Higher Education is called New Pathways from College to Career. One of the highest areas that senior students, so students who are about to graduate, said they had grown with the most was this kind of bundle of ideas related to social capital building. And three of the areas in social capital building are networking with alumni and professionals. 70% of students said that was an important piece. Interviews or shadowing, actually working with people in experiential settings, 77% said that they engaged with that. But 79% said that discussing their future career with faculty members was some of the most important areas. So you mentioned Lauren. It sounds like part of her influence as I think you used the word mentor.
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
Helped to shape that pathway in the studio art BFA. Absolutely. So Elijah, you mentioned that when you started at YSU, you had CCP credit, college and high school credit. I love it. That's great to get those and bring those in. And you started undecided HHS. That's Health and Human Services is what HHS stands for. Tell me more about where you were at that point and how you eventually found photography.
So I mean, I always loved art. I was not a drawer, contradictory to Emily.
Okay.
Not a drawer at all. But I loved art, and I was always somebody that had disposable cameras. Like, every time I went to the store, I picked one up, and I had tons and tons of photos. And when I was 15, I bought myself my first DSLR camera. It was Black Friday, and my birthday happens to fall like right around Thanksgiving, so it was perfect timing. And I bought a refurbished camera for about $200, and I ran wild. And so I started here as undecided health and human services, kind of leaning towards going to pre-med. I mean, who doesn't want to be a doctor when they're younger? Who doesn't think that's the coolest job, to like save people's lives and whatnot? But I really found that I had a passion for photography. So I decided when I officially enrolled here as a actual freshman to declare my major in photography. And since then, I've changed like my trajectory for my career, but it definitely has like created a strong like foundation for my career.
Well, and you mentioned that you kind of your pathway. You mentioned that you're working with the Butler Institute of American Art right now,
Mm-hmm.
and also with some other nonprofits, I think it was as
Mm-hmm.
well. And I think part of what we need to think about, not just in the Cliff College of Creative Arts, but in any field, is kind of the transferability of skills that we're learning and
Mm-hmm.
how we see those apply in different areas. And I'd like to spend some time talking about that. Whoever wants to kind of jump in on that, can you speak to some of the transferability of skills that you learned that you might have not realized
Mm-hmm.
have positively impacted your career trajectory while being a student at YSU?
Yeah, I mean, so while I was here as a student, I worked 3 college campus jobs, and I worked as a student office assistant. I worked in the photography laboratory and then also the sculpture laboratory. And I mean, the skills I learned there alone, I mean, just doing those 3 positions have been amazing. I mean, I currently work in an office job now, and without working in an office position, I would have never gotten like a interest in like administration. And that's actually, so I am going to be going to grad school in the fall for museum administration, which is kind of like hand in hand with my experience working at the Butler, and then also with my experience working as like in administration and office work. But I mean, we all have to take those super annoying like classes that we don't want to take, like all of the, what would you call them? What are they called? The
Like
general
Prereqs, gen ed courses, okay.
Nobody wants to take those classes. They want to get right into the meat and potatoes of their career. But I mean, I learned how to write well. I learned how to format a resume. I learned how to make a good cover letter. All of those things that you need to have a successful career. I mean, I'm always changing my resume. Always. I mean, if I'm applying for this job, I'm going to make it look like I want this job. If I'm applying for this job, I'm going to make it look like I want this job. Changing, reordering. I kind of cannibalize other resumes to create like a better one for the position that I want. So.
Yeah, we always talk about how important it is to hold a mirror up to the job that you want to apply for, or hold a mirror up to kind of your future self and say, how am I best representing that with skills that I've already developed, and then can continue to build upon in my future endeavors. Emily, transferability of skills, things like that. Did you have any campus jobs or part-time jobs while you were a student? I think that's a good place to look at too.
Yes, I did. I, like Elijah, also worked in the art office, and we did a bunch of things up there, from filing to printing to running errands to carrying 40-pound packages. I mean, we really were doing anything and everything. Just from the nature of the building that we're working in. Answering the phone. Believe it or not, that is a lot harder than most people think it is, because you have to be able to direct people to the person they need to talk to. Or like sometimes like we would just be able to answer those questions, because we're knowledgeable of that information, but like when you have a job to do and then the person on the other line wants to just talk to you, sometimes it's hard to close that conversation. So it's really, I learned a lot of skills about just learning how to talk to people. And then I also worked in the sculpture department as a lab assistant. And a few years back, I was tutoring at a Youngstown City School, reading and math skills. And I would stay there 3 days out of the week, and I would tutor a bunch of different middle schoolers, their reading and math skills. And having to remember like what each student needs, because they're all different, being able to keep record of that. I mean, there was a lot of note taking, and in the sculpture department, when people come in, sometimes like we would have to help students work on their projects. Like, we were problem solvers. If they couldn't figure it out, nobody else was there, so like we would just work as a team, and we would try to figure out like how to glue certain parts, how to secure things, give advice on how they should treat the surface of their sculpture. I mean, it was really really something, even to like just reminding people of like welding procedures too, because we do teach how to weld there, and we have to know how the machines work, especially if something were to not work properly. I mean, we had to have that knowledge to an extent to problem solve. So problem solving skills.
So I'm hearing a lot of transferable skills. I mean, problem solving skills, those communication skills, working with people just to help them, you know, whether it's on the phone, helping them find where they need to go, or helping them get the information that they need. Those are really, really important skills as well. Within that bucket of kind of social capital that we talked about earlier, right? We mentioned shadowing, or kind of on the field, or in the field, I should say, experiences. I'd like to ask you both to you know, kind of beyond those part-time jobs, what are some of the most kind of transformative or meaningful experiential learning opportunities, hands-on learning that you feel like you engaged with? I know, Emily, you talked about Lauren helping you guide as a mentor, but kind of apart from the mentorship capacity, what were some of the most exciting hands-on experiences, whether it's classes or some of those problem-solving pieces? Any stories we can talk about related to those?
Well, as an artist, when, at least in classes, like, we're given prompts like to our projects, and for each student's going to respond differently to those prompts, because like our personal experiences just have so much of an impact on the decisions that we make, the materials that we use, the colors that we're drawn to, the emotions that are experienced while making these works of art. You really see yourself grow as an individual, not just the skills that you're advancing in, but as an individual, the way you move and energetically act within the space that you occupy. And these projects also had an influence on my other job. I was a sip and paint instructor. I taught out in Hubbard for 5 years, and I'm just now getting back into it, but on my own. And I just, as an instructor, I want to help the people who are taking my class relate to the work of art that we're creating, because I take them through step by step, just as I would take myself through these projects step by step. And sometimes you don't want to finish the project because you're overwhelmed and you're lacking motivation to do so, but I'm always trying to be encouraging and know that you do have to take it step by step, and before you know it, the project's done and you're happy that you pushed yourself through it. Because who wants to just leave things be? I mean, you can really work through a lot with willpower.
Absolutely. Right, trying to help people in that environment break down something that seems like they could never accomplish into those smaller bite-sized pieces. That's a great way to think about it. And I got so excited thinking about paint and sips, because we've got one scheduled for our office to celebrate the end of the semester. So when you said paint and sip, I said, yes, we've got one coming up. We're going to do peat.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And I'm going to try to figure out how I can mess it up, because I have a high level of confidence in my inability to create visual art. Or at least let me put it this way, I have a high level of confidence in my inability to follow directions and make it my own, which is in and of itself, like that's how I want to express, right? So
Absolutely.
Elijah, let's come back to you. Hands-on experiences or experiences and stories that you feel like really formed your pathway.
So I was an intern for the Butler Institute of American Art for, it would have been, it started the semester of the pandemic. So right before the pandemic started.
Good timing. All
yes.
right.
I mean, I'm going to be honest. I was a little thankful for the pandemic because I'm somebody that likes to put too many things on my plate, and I was taking 19 credit hours. I was an intern working 3 jobs, and I decided to join a fraternity that semester. So I was kind of thankful for the pandemic. It took a lot of the stress off because I got to stay home and do it all. But I started my internship there under the education director, Joyce Mistovich, and then halfway through I was going to be switching over to work with Allison Bagala, who is the collections registrar, and work on a specific project that they wanted me to work on was with a collection of dresses made by Nanette Lepore, who's a notable alumni here. But unfortunately I never got to do that project, but I got to do 1.5 million other exciting things. So when the Butler reopened, I reached out to Allison, and she brought me on as an intern, a volunteer intern, and I continued there all the way until last year, and they brought me on as a contracted assistant to her. And so I've gotten to do tons of things to Butler. The experience I was most passionate about was helping her curate a show of Hispanic artists. I'm Hispanic, and it was really amazing that she reached out to me to help her do that project. We create a virtual exhibition of Hispanic artists that were represented in the collection at the Butler, and we wrote like like an exhibition statement and researched all the artists, and then we presented it to Lou Zona, the director, and he approved of it, and it was on the website, and that's still one of like my greatest like endeavors that I've gotten to be a part of. But working in the museum again has definitely pushed me into the career that I want to be in. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to pivot for a few seconds here, and I want to go back to thinking about campus, and I just want to ask you to reflect on, one of the concepts that we talk about in higher education is people's third space. And if you haven't heard of this, the first space is the home, second space is like the class or the work.
Mm-hmm.
But the third space is, where do you go to study? Where do you go to hang out with your friends? What's that other place that becomes sort of part of your culture while you're on campus? And we talked about Bliss Hall, we talked about the building, but are there other places, or is there a specific room in Bliss Hall? What's that third space that you found as a student at YSU?
Well, a few spaces.
Okay, so third, fourth, fifth, and sixth space.
Yes, but we'll start the third space. Specifically in sculpture, we were assigned studio spaces, and I was just like in the corner. So literally that corner was my third space. I would just come, and because I was a monitor at the time, I had the permission to come in after hours when I needed to. So this is an exceptional ordeal, but I would spend a lot of time there. I would be there late at night. I would study for my classes. But the library, I would be in the library, and I would go all the way to the top floor where I can't hear anything. And I would just sit there and read, and sometimes just reflect, because I will say my last year of school was incredibly stressful. And there were people who were supportive of me, but no matter what anybody says to you, you have to be able to accept that and reflect upon the things that people are giving to you. Otherwise, it's no good. So I would just go to the top floor in the library, and I would sit there and just reflect on my feelings and give myself some reassurance that I was going to make it through, because no one ever said that going to college was going to be easy. I did not expect that. I knew that there were going to be a lot of stressors, and I graduated, and I'm doing things in my field. So sometimes you just need to be in a space that is quiet. And the last space, not really on campus, it's kind of like right off campus downtown, but I would go to Susie's. It's a bar. A lot of my friends have bands that they're in, and I would just go and have a drink, when I'm of age. Because you're not of age when you come here. But I would go and I would just listen to my friends play and not think about school. Like you have to take a break so you can come back refreshed and you just get back to the grind.
Well, Elijah, I want to come to you in a second, but I feel like we need to stop on a couple of pieces here, because as a student in a creative field, right, I think there's opportunities maybe more often than some other areas to find cultural outlets that are really unique to being someone who's interested in the creative fields. So we talked about Susie's, right? And there's been technically 3 Susie's. My wife and I met at the original Susie's downtown, and then which is now O'Donnell? What's the original Susie's now? It's that short, long building downtown where the original Susie's was. So I have good feelings at Susie's. I feel that absolutely. The library, that was your reflective space. But then I want to go back to the sculpture lab and talk about that, because that's important for someone who might want to pursue a pathway in the arts. That sculpture lab, you said you were in a corner.
Yes.
And if I'm thinking about the sculpture lab, right, it's in the basement technically.
Yes, it is.
But there are windows, right? I feel like
At the
dungeon.
top.
At the top.
The dungeon.
Yeah. Well, I think it's one of the cooler areas on campus, because whenever you say, "Oh, I've got a space in the basement," people don't think it's going to be as nice as that space is, because of the windows and the natural light that can be in there as well.
Yeah, that sculpture space, man. Having to open and close that space, it felt like it was my own space, despite having many people come in and out of it. And I would introduce myself, and I would be talking to freshmen who are working on their foundations projects, and they don't know how to use the scroll saw, and I'm like, okay, let's go learn how to use the scroll saw. But it gets real quiet in there, and then all the ventilation and everything that else is running becomes real loud. It's weird how the environment changes, when you're in that space alone versus having a multitude of people in there and everybody's just being a busy bee. But those windows, I would just meditate to those windows, because you would see this constant progression of the sky. Sometimes the squares, because there's paneling on those windows, so the squares would be bright blue, or sometimes the moon, the sky's this deep blue, purple, the sun setting and the moon's peeking through in the window, just depending on when you were in there. And it just kind of regroups me, that I'm a living, breathing thing, and I have all these tools at my hands to create something, and just being there with myself, all you have is yourself in that moment, and it has to be enough.
Absolutely.
So I don't know, tough lessons, tough love.
Gives you a chance to kind of confront the human existence, right?
For sure.
Which I like. Well, let's Elijah, let's talk about that third space, third, fourth, fifth, sixth space. What do we have on campus?
For me, it was definitely the photo lab.
Yeah.
Specifically the dark room. I would be in the dark room till 1 in the morning by myself, mixing up chemicals, doing my thing, listening to music, trying to hide from the ghosts. It gets scary, especially when you turn off the lights, because there's lights in there, but those lights you have to turn off sometimes, and it's pitch black, especially when you have to develop your film. But another space I would say for me would be the theater, Ford Theater. I picked up a minor in theater, didn't finish it, just wanted to do it to take voice lessons, and then also I was very involved with the theater program here. I was in Addams Family, the musical, when they did it, and then I also did a lot of the cabarets. I did anything whenever my schedule could permit it. But I really loved being in the theater. It was an outlet for me, especially in high school, and then it was awesome to be able to transfer that experience into my college career, and through that I've made a lot of friends that I'm very close with today. One of my best friends, Hala Henry, she's an alumni here too, but we're very close now. She's going to be moving with me to grad school in New York City. So like without doing that theater, I wouldn't have met her and had that experience. So, yeah.
Well, we find that, so often people who have an interest in art or theater or music or video production, whatever it might be, those don't tend to be isolated interests, right? And any of the creative fields tend to have a nice blend. And that I used to work in advising in the college, and that was just such a common experience to have people with minor in one area and major in another area, and then blend those interests in a nice way. So that's great. So Ford Theater as well as the Photo Lab. I love that. And you're an Addams family. That's great. I remember seeing that. Absolutely. So we've got about 5 or so minutes left here, and there's 2 things I'd like to touch base on before we finish up. The first one being, just for a student who might listen to this in the future, we briefly mentioned students who go into art might be working on their foundation classes. I sort of know what they are, but for someone who doesn't, tell me what that looks like. What does that mean? What's a foundation course, and how does that build to something that they have to do?
Well, your foundation courses are the first 4 courses you have to take in order to continue the program for the art department. So it's foundation drawing 2, foundations of 2D design, and then foundations of 3D design.
Absolutely.
And then you do your portfolio review. So they can be very, very intimidating, especially when you're not you're not specifically a drawing person or a painting person. But what I will say is the professors don't want to see you fail, and if they say push this a little bit darker, push this highlight a little bit brighter, maybe cool down this color, do it. Because when it comes time for your portfolio review and, you don't pass the first time, it sucks. I mean, I didn't pass my first time, but luckily, my professors said, we told you to do this and you didn't do it, and this is what happens. And, they said, now go and fix this, and then you're going to get accepted. And so I did it. And, it hurts, but, that's a lot of what the program is. It's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of, thinking you know what's right, and then learning that, if you push something, just do something 10 minutes longer than you thought you would, you're going to come out with something amazing.
Yeah. Well, Elijah, I appreciate you sharing that, because I've worked with students in the past who are really interested in digital art, the Adobe Suite, things like that, and that could feel intimidating to say I have to take drawing classes and all these other pieces. So I appreciate you sharing that story. Emily, what was your experience like with the foundation review?
See, for me, it was like I wanted nothing to do with Photoshop.
Yeah, okay, gotcha.
InDesign, Illustrator, none of that. That was super intimidating to me, because I felt most confident with something I can hold in my hand, something that I have more control over. Because you do have control over technology to an extent. But I did learn, I agree with Elijah, our professors were great. They really did not want to see us fail. They wanted to help us. They wanted to teach us. But if you can't comply with that, then you're going to be left in the dust. But that's on you. A part of coming to college is you're a young adult, and now you have a choice over your life. You have a choice of showing up or not showing up. And to the point of being in these foundation classes, the goal is to teach you to a more lengthy extent what the elements and principles of design are. Just what is art? What makes up art? What are the fundamentals that make works of art successful and striking? And you have to understand these very basic things, like value, the lightness and darkness of a color, to shape and form, to line, to texture, to movement. There's so many things that you have to consider in your artwork that's going to make it extra, that's going to make it stand out compared to the people who don't understand these things, because like our like, I guess you could say the hierarchy of education, like, yes, like we are more exposed to different cultures, and like taking an art history course, like you learn how art was made in different time periods from different people. But when you're in like K-12 taking art class, your worldview, I guess, is based on Eurocentric views, like Western ways of teaching.
Sure.
Where when you come to college, it's definitely more expansive, and like that can be kind of like shocking. It's like, whoa, like I didn't know this existed. I mean, just having to adapt, but like you'll get through it. Students will get through it because we did.
In those classes, I mean, and really, I think it's important to know, like the whole purpose of the BFA. And I've said BFA. I don't know if I've actually said Bachelor of Fine Arts. Like that's the degree that these art programs live within. It's to become a well-rounded artist. You know, it's to
Yes.
have that diversity. It's to have that, you know, breadth of knowledge, not just about how things happen here or how they happen with one medium, but how they happen around the world and throughout the history of how we've engaged with art as a culture. So I want to jump into our last question. It's sort of multifaceted, but they relate. What I want to ask both of you to reflect on for me is, what's the best piece of advice someone gave you as you were kind of solidifying your decision about your eventual degree? And then what advice would you give to a young person in their first semester who's considering the creative arts as a pathway? You can think for a few seconds, no rush.
I have something. Do you want me to go?
You're good.
Okay, so back to my mentor, Lauren Baker.
Okay.
She would always say to me, don't let anybody dull your gem. And she, I don't want to say like she's a mystical person, but she's very in touch like with herself, and she's like very positive and spiritual, and she would give me books. She'd be like, here, read this book and tell me what you thought, because like she would just take everybody in as if we were her own kids. I mean, she was very about the student. She never tried to tell you like it's my way or the highway. But she would say, yeah, don't let anybody dull your gem. And it brought a lot of self-confidence to me, like being able to make decisions that benefit me and the kind of life that I want to live, having decided that I wanted to continue school after high school, which is a big decision because not all students have to attend college after high school. There are many other paths that students are taking now, especially now, to become stable young adults and be able to live on your own, or like whatever it is that you want to do in your life. But my advice with that is that when you're starting here in college, you may find out that the things that you're taking aren't for you, and that's okay, because you're you and you're not somebody else, and you shouldn't be living your life in accordance to somebody else, because you're not living in your authentic self. You're not feeling your most true feelings. If these courses are stressing you or boring you or you're not interested, it's okay. Like, that's why we have higher education in the university, like our advisement. Like, meet with those people or talk with people, your friends, who are interested in the things that you have interests in. I mean, you're going to find yourself in a very tight space if you keep following something that you know inside of you isn't for you, and that's okay. I mean, I've had many of those realizations, and not just in college, like outside of college, relationships, family dynamics, jobs. Like, I've quit jobs because, I mean, it just absolutely made me so miserable. Like, I could not function, and I was like, this isn't for me. I need to find something that can support me in being in an environment that is supportive of me, people who are like-minded. So you'll find that out once you start experiencing things, and sometimes you have to experience bad things, not intentionally, but to realize, well, you're right, like, this isn't for me. And being able to confidently make that decision And you might not be happy with it at first because of the unknown. But as time progresses, you do figure things out, and you get to a place where you were like, yeah, this is what I needed to do. So self-confidence is what you're going to need.
Self-confidence, following your gut, and I'm kind of distilling that down to like a pithy statement of follow your gut, but you have to believe in yourself and stay aligned to your values too, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. Elijah, what about advice you were given or advice you would give to someone in their first semester who's considering this path?
Well, specifically some advice that I received was from Joy Christensen Erb, which she's over in the dean's office of Cliff, I think.
Yeah.
But she was my professor first, and then she became the dean or the chair of the department that I worked in. And something that she always taught me in her classes is to try everything 10 different ways. And at first I was like, no, I know what I'm doing. I know what I want to do. And when I finally, realized that I need to try these things 10 different ways, it really helped me to, change and evolve the work that I was working on to make something amazing. And I actually translate that into my life. I mean, especially when I'm thinking about situations I'm in, or job opportunities, or things that I want to do with friends, thinking about 10 different ways that I can handle that situation, or 10 different scenarios that I could go about living. And it helps me. It helps me to visualize things more, to get a better outcome from what I wanted. But some advice that I could give to students that want to join YSU and the art department is probably to... I didn't think about that one. I would say be active on campus. There were a lot of art students that came to school and went home, and those are the people that I noticed didn't like being in college. And for me, I was somebody that I was an art student, but I was also actively involved on campus. I was in different organizations. I was the president of an organization. I was in the theater department. And I think without that, I wouldn't have the connections that I have to YSU and to the people here that I have today. And I definitely would not be on the career path that I am today. So I would definitely say make those connections with those people, because networking connections are probably the most important thing I feel that I have when moving on with my career.
I appreciate you saying that, and it's important for first-year students to remember that no matter where we end up declaring a major, no matter where we end up pursuing our degree path, we're a YSU student, right? And there's so much happening on campus, and there's so many opportunities to meet people who are different than you, right? I always would hope that students who major in one college have at least one contact or friend from some other colleges, and so they have a different perspective on their pathway, and aren't kind of locked into just people that they're having their own kind of major classes with. So getting that wide network, I think, is really valuable. So we've been listening to the Career Conversations podcast. I want to thank both of our guests. We've had Emily with us today and Elijah, both graduates in the art program. Elijah with the photo major, and then Emily with the interdisciplinary studio art pathway. Thank you so much for your time being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'd also like to thank some of the other people who made this possible, the Bouncing Back Grant and the Office of Alumni and Engagement. Again, with the Office of Career Exploration and Development, my name is Dr. Justin Edwards. Have a great day.